The Lord be with you. Oh, let's try that again. The Lord be with you. It's good to be with you today. We have some goodies. So our Beth Pansino put together some, sorry to put you on the spot, muffins, that's right. Now, some goodies over here. So we'll get started in about 2 minutes, but feel free to grab a plate, and then we'll get started.
Yeah.
See, now it works.
Check. You got a handheld if you need it.
Okay. So I see a few new folks in the room. If you haven't already, please avail yourselves. There's quite a breakfast spread over here, and so feel free to get some breakfast. We are going to go ahead and we're going to pray, and then we're going to get started this morning, kind of sharing some of our memories. I see several of you who were on the first trip, and then many of you who are on the second trip, and then some folks who are just curious what happened. What do we do? What do we learn? And what are some interesting takeaways? So Pastor Ben is master of all things, and they're wearing about 12 hats right now. And we are having difficulties, some more technical difficulties. We're not quite sure what's going on, but he's getting it sorted out. In just another minute, you'll see some slides behind me. But before we jump in here, let's open with a word of prayer. Almighty and gracious God, we give you thanks for the gift of this day, and we thank you for the opportunity to gather here today and with your Spirit, because we do gather in your name, and we know that you are in our midst. We pray, Lord, that in this hour, as we consider and share our stories, from Israel, from the Holy Land, that you would be with us, that you would open our eyes and make us, help us to share these stories, and may all of them glorify you. Be with us, Almighty God, in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm just seeing the slides up. There we go. Here we go. Progress. Can I have the clicker as well? What's wrong? Is it not a PowerPoint?
Not in the same way.
Oh, this one right here.
Slide.
Yeah.
This.
That's what I did. That's a Google slide.
Open with PowerPoint
Yeah, I could.
or download, yeah.
Okay.
Say it should
Well,
be.
temporarily, that's.
Temporarily.
It's doing the
You
job.
can I have the clicker? Oh, there's the clicker. Okay, victory. So I'm gonna share a little bit of my experiences with Israel, but then I'm gonna open things up to those, especially those who are on the trip. Could share some of your own stories. But before we jump into starting about this pilgrimage, I'll say that it was, for me, it was surreal for a host of reasons. Because one of the most fundamental was, even though I've gone to church and read the Bible for most of my life, and in doing so, I've read a lot about Israel, Galilee, and Jerusalem. I realized that there was this unexamined assumption in my life that these places that we read about in the Bible only exist in the Bible. Of course, I knew that you could hop on a plane and go visit those holy sites, but the thought seemed somewhat preposterous, right? As if you could go visit Narnia or Never Never Land, Middle Earth, or Eden. But just a few months ago, I saw David's tomb, took communion near the garden tomb, prayed at the Kotel, baptized several people in the River Jordan, and stood at Mount Nebo to see the promised land, and I walked the stations of the cross, right? So there are many, the scriptures and the story of the faith has come alive through this trip. So here are several important sites in Jerusalem. We'll jump right to Jerusalem, and then we'll kind of jump back, and I'll open things up as folks want to share stories. But this is Jerusalem. The holy city is a city of three faiths. Right here, you have some representatives of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all in the same city. And you would think that so much faith and trust in God would lead to peace, but we know the story, of course, it does not. There is a lot of contention. You even hear in the news now, thank you, Ben, you even hear in the news of conflict right in Jerusalem in the last several weeks. But before we got to Jerusalem, we were on the bus. We were coming through the tunnel, and we were approaching the city. And we read from Psalm 121, which is one of the Psalms of Ascents. And I want to share that with you as we look at these and consider these beautiful images and places. Psalm 121 says, "I lift my eyes to the hills. From where will my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. He who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. He is your keeper. The Lord, your shade at your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all evil. He will keep your life. The Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time on and forevermore." Right at the very beginning, there are those key words. I lift my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? If you don't know already, half of you in the room do, at least, Jerusalem is on a hill. And so as you talk about going into Jerusalem, you actually talk about going up to Jerusalem because it is on a hill. Now, it's not a mountain, right? We do talk about Mount Zion. It's not all that tall, if truth being told. But there's still this sense of going up. And this is where, as we believe and proclaim that God, once upon a time, right, God said, this is where I want you to build a house for my name. Before we dig, yeah, that's right. Kind of another 30,000 foot view here and something to share as it relates to my experience. As we traveled throughout Israel and Jordan, we were traveling through all sorts of different places and time periods. If you like Doctor Who, Ben, I know there's at least one Doctor Who fan in the room, or should I say two, right? Doctor Who is a great sci-fi show where the doctor travels through time and space. And I thought about that a lot as we were traveling through Israel because we traveled through various time periods, well before the biblical era, during the biblical era when scriptures were being written, the time of Jesus, the Roman and Byzantine era, and even through to the modern day formation of Israel. And we talked about the Holocaust, right? These are stretching over 5,000 years of history, and we talked about all of that in 2 weeks. Well, it's a lot. But then geographically, we also ran the gamut, right? So we were at one point, and we'll see some pictures here in another moment, we were at the highest points in Israel, which is Mount Hermon. We saw snow. When you all were in your T-shirts and mowing your lawns, we were in snow in the Middle East, which you didn't think would be a thing that could happen. But then we also were in the Dead Sea. We were swimming in the Dead Sea a few days later. So the highest to the lowest. We were in the north. We were in all over the central area: Tel Aviv, Galilee, Jerusalem, West Bank, Bethlehem, and some of us continued on to Jordan. And then, because there was this sense of not being quite stable in any one time, in any one place, I also had this strange sensation that if you just waited there long enough, or maybe if you peeked around the corner, you might see some Canaanites or King David and his royal procession going by, right? It was, you almost didn't know what day it was or what century it was because you kept moving back and forth all over through time. It was disorienting in a good way. You have here two things, and I know that they're certainly not enough for everyone, so I encourage you to share. But here you have a map of Israel. This is a big map, and then I've zoomed in here. And especially trip participants, if you want to share a story or you see something that triggers a memory and something, raise your hand. I do not want to talk the whole time. But you'll see here, this is the central Israel. This is where the airport is. We spent a few days in Tel Aviv, also called Yaffo, because Jaffa, which is Yaffo, is very close to Tel Aviv. And then we were up here around the Sea of Galilee for several days. And then we were down here in Jerusalem. And every day, the structure of every day was similar. In the morning, you had a dairy-heavy meal and at your hotel because you can't mix meat and dairy. In Jewish tradition, there is the one verse in Scripture that says you should not cook a kid in his mother's milk. And from that, Jewish scholars said, okay, let's never mix meat and dairy just in case. So you probably could, but we never saw any cheeseburgers. You don't mix meat and cheese. They did have pizza for breakfast, but it did not have meat. No meat. Pizza for breakfast. All that cheese, yeah. But you can have fish because fish is kind of an in-between class. It's not meat. So at 7 a.m., I did not want fish for breakfast, but you could have it if you wanted. So in the mornings, you would have that dairy-heavy breakfast. You would go about exploring all day long, and then you come back for a late dinner that was meat-heavy. No dairy in sight. No cheese, no milk, no butter even, no butter. So I'm sorry, Bonnie. Bonnie wouldn't go. That's right. No butter. But it was especially for people who wanted, you like decaf coffee at night. Well, you've got to have a non-dairy creamer. But if you are lactose intolerant, you can trust that every dessert at dinner is safe for you, which was a really interesting thing. We had at least one person who was lactose intolerant, and he had a ball because he knew every dessert he could eat with no regrets. So the very first night in Tel Aviv, we spent all day on the plane. We finally get there, and we settle in, go to sleep, and we're kind of disoriented with the time zones. And about 3 in the morning, Courtney is next to me, right? Because we went together, and we're in bed, and I wake up. It's around 3:15 in the morning, and I'm feeling a little off. I feel like, when you've been traveling, you just feel like a little like motion sickness. And I think, oh, what is going on? What do I feel? This has got to be some land sickness, right? So I look over at the sliding glass door to the balcony, and there is a curtain rod, and the curtain rod's going, "Zoop, zoop, zoop, zoop." And I think, this is not in my head, and it wasn't, because if you heard about this, I hope you have, this in Turkey and Syria, this big earthquake that was magnitude 7.8, we felt it. It woke me up in the middle of the night. Yeah. No, go ahead. That's great. So it was a 7.8 earthquake, and we didn't, there was no destruction in Israel, but we felt the shock, the quakes, aftershocks. Yeah, big earthquake. We had an exciting couple of days. So at 3 in the morning, yeah, we felt this earthquake. So I'm thinking, is this really an earthquake? I went downstairs, and I tried to figure out in Hebrew, how do you say, was this an earthquake, right? So I talked to the young guy at the desk. He had to be, I don't know, 19 years old, and he understood what I was saying, but he said, he responded to me in English, and he said, "No, we don't have earthquakes here." But then also, almost every day as we were traveling, I heard a story about, oh, well, if you see here, these buildings collapsed in the great earthquake of 363, where Sepphoris was severely damaged. And then over here, 749, the great earthquake of Galilee, that Sheol was completely destroyed. And here in Safed, 1837, the big earthquake where the whole city, which is built on a hill, collapsed, and it was just like a snowball effect. The whole city was destroyed. Okay. So, oops, we are. It was a new hire. Ben, could you advance to the next slide when you get a moment? So we started off in Tel Aviv. Oh, that's okay. There we go. So we started off in Tel Aviv. We saw a lot of good food. And this is the point at which trip participants, if you see something or want to share a story, I'm going to go through kind of day by day and just showcase half a dozen pictures for each place, each day. So this is a beautiful church in the city of Jaffa. In the book of Acts, we hear about Jaffa because Peter is there. And there's a beautiful painting behind the altar here. It's a Catholic church, commemorating the story of when Peter sees the sheet with the unclean animals and hears "eat," right? And so that happened there in Jaffa. It was freezing cold. It was raining. It was hard to be outside, if I'm honest. and it was like, this is Israel. This is the Middle East. This is what it's going to be like. I almost didn't pack a winter coat. And then I packed a winter coat and had 4 layers underneath. That's how cold it was almost every day. Anyone else want to share stories from the first couple days here? Rain. Lots and lots of rain, but mostly the first day or two. And then it was a spritz here and there. A spritz? Yeah. Sprinkle? Yeah, something, Dave?
It was a lot different than the first trip. And
Yeah.
that's in the weather. Yeah.
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 Here we're continuing around Tel Aviv. This is not the picture that I took. I had to find this one on the web, I'll be honest, because, and some of these are from other trip participants as well. This was in Caesarea. Caesarea, if you go on page 2 here, Maritima. Top of page 2, we're on February the 7th. There's a beautiful theater here. It's been around for thousands of years. It's near the water, but it was raining so badly we could barely even stand out. So we stayed here under a tunnel, and we talked for a minute, and then we got back on the bus pretty quickly. This is an interesting site here. This is in Megiddo. This is one of the oldest known altars. This is not a Christian or Jewish altar. This is a Canaanite altar that's from 2700 BC. So they unearthed this. You saw that this is where the earth is today, and they dug down and they uncovered this. Probably the oldest altar of its kind.
Michael?
Yeah, go ahead.
So on your maps, you don't have Caesarea, which is, so you're aware, you'll see the ocean there. It is like due north of Tel Aviv, right around Netanya, I believe just a little north of that. And then Megiddo is almost due east of Caesarea, right? Yeah. So that's where we are in terms of the map.
So yeah, when we were in these days, we were still around Tel Aviv. So we're returning to our hotel in Tel Aviv, but we're doing our day trips out within an hour or two radius. Yeah. The next day, February the 8th, we're in the beautiful north. We're starting off. What was that? I believe this is the Beatitudes, right? Church of the Beatitudes? Yeah. Yeah. So here we have, this is February the 8th. This is probably, this is one of the more interesting things. Somebody want to talk about this? I'm talking way too much.
Go ahead. You go ahead. So here we are. Oh, here. You want to be?
Who's on first?
This
Good.
boat was found not that long ago when the level of the Sea of Galilee went down, and some people on the edge of the water found it, and they brought it up. And this dates back to the time of Jesus. And it's been very, very well preserved. And so it's kind of like, wow, to see it. But that's what that's about.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the picture right above that, and I am doing a reading in Capernaum, which is that picture and the one in the lower left corner, Capernaum.
So these are all Galilee pictures here. So this is just near the Sea of Galilee. We actually did a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. Here you can see our group on the ship itself, or the boat itself. Then this is Capernaum. Here, this is an ancient synagogue, if I remember correctly, and where Jesus may have actually preached, right? It says Jesus was preaching around all these cities, including Capernaum, and it's possible that that's one of the places Jesus preached. Here is, I don't think we actually went into this museum up above, and you can't quite. It's a church. Oh, I thought it was over there. Great. So
Over the ruins.
that's where I'm trying to go.
Yeah, to protect them.
To protect the ruins, the tradition is that there's Peter's house underneath the church there. So,
Jesus stayed frequent.
yeah. So, continuing on around Galilee on February the 8th, we went to Yardenit, which is a baptismal site, not the most traditional site. Unfortunately, the more traditional site where Jesus may have been baptized is in a contentious political area. And so the Israeli government established this site as an alternative. But what was really neat is that Dave and I did some immersion baptisms. And as a former, now Reformed Baptist, this is the first time I've ever done immersion baptisms. So that was really neat. And we actually had one man, a husband of a friend of Nancy's, who was baptized for the very first time.
That's him getting,
Luke.
that's Luke Bishop getting baptized on the left. And then we had this man who lives in New Jersey now, but's originally from Nigeria, and his wife was there, and he just like walked right in, and we told him to go in there and he wanted to be baptized, so.
Don't tell session, don't tell any session member.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Thanks. Got us.
Do you want to tell anything about the baptism there?
No, he did talk to us beforehand. He asked us if he could join us. He'd never been baptized and wanted to be baptized. And Michael and I held an immediate powwow, invoking the presence of session. And
We almost had a quorum.
got invoked permission.
That's it.
And yeah, he was delightful and very, very appreciative. Very, very appreciative.
And then
The water was cold.
the water was freezing. Freezing.
You don't feel your legs when you
No.
when you've done 20 baptisms. You don't feel your legs when you come back out again.
So I will share what just happened around this time. So it is, if you can see, the water's murky. It's not clear. And I mean, this has been here for decades. And so you know that these steps in the water haven't been properly cleaned in a long time. And it's not quite clear what's right. So when I walked out, I actually half baptized myself because I fell into the water. Like literally, like everything but my head. And then I assumed that all the way out it was flat. It was not, because as we are, and I kind of checked my footing, and I was like, okay, we're here. What they teach you, I looked up YouTube videos on how to do this the night before, right? About 3 or 4, because I want to make sure. So they say what you should do is you should hold the person and then put your foot out. And kind of like you're dancing, right? Like you're going to dip your partner, right? You put your foot out to catch him and hold him. What I didn't realize is where my foot was going to go was a ledge. So I went like this. And then I tried to catch myself. And Dave said, and I was like, okay, we did it. Praise the Lord, I'm alive. And Dave said, we have to do it again. Like, oh gosh, okay. So we moved and it was fine. This is not a site on the trip, but this was something that was special for Courtney and I. After dinner one night, we had some extra time, and we started walking around the hotel. We were on Galilee, you could see it. And so we said, let's just go for a walk. And we found this place that said, no tent camping. And then we see this little fire here. So you think this is a prime spot. And here is the Sea of Galilee. And it was really special. We actually went back to it 2 other times. But what was really special for me is as we considered the story in the Gospel of John after Jesus was resurrected, and we read it and considered it right from this place, Jesus, just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but his disciples who were out in the boat did not know it was him. And Jesus called to them and said, children, you have no fish, have you? And they answered him, no. And Jesus said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many. And the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, only 100 yards off. But when they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of fish, 153. And Jesus said, "Come, have breakfast." I love this story, and I have absolutely no idea if it happened here or over there or somewhere around the sea, but the story goes that it was here. And so I love contemplating that. And these reeds out here are probably about where the boat would have been, that Peter would have jumped in and ran, swam to shore. There we go. Okay, here is continuing around the Galilee. February 9th, I promised snow. And I think I even sent pictures to Bonnie. Courtney and I were sending pictures to you. And you were hanging out with, I think, Nathaniel that day. And you're like, we're in T-shirts. We're hanging out outside. And we have snow in Israel, which I thought was fun.
Parents
yeah.
were
You go
parents
ahead,
would
Chelsea.
pull their children out of school to go up and see the snow because it doesn't happen very often. So even as our bus was going up, you would see cars pulled off to the side and kids, like snowball fights and building a snowman. And so that was, where us, we were like, ugh, it's snowing. It's snowing. They were super excited.
And our guide, Bruce, was just incredible, giving us all sorts of extra context. And we kept seeing all these cars with snow on them. And for us, Northeast Ohio, whatever, a car with a snow on it. And he said, "Look at that car." We said, "Yeah." He said, "It didn't snow on that car. Do you see what they did? They took snow from the ground and put it on the car so that when they get to Tel Aviv, they can show off. I saw snow." For us, it's like, are you kidding? But for them, it's a big deal. Here, we also, in the midst of all this snow, we were so cold and hungry, we found some coffee and chocolate shop. And I thought this was just hilarious. This is the Western Wall, the holiest site that you can visit in Judaism, made out of chocolate. Made out of chocolate. This is at that chocolate shop. We also visited a city. So because this trip was not just Christians, it was also we also had Jewish folks. It was an interfaith trip. We also visited several sites of importance for Judaism. And this is Beth Mancino's. This is a little painting of the city of Safed. But it is a mystical city where mystical Judaism really took root and grew over the last several centuries. And here we are actually in a synagogue, learning about all that. And you can see we're cold. We're all bundled up. If you can squint, you can even see Elaine here, right? With your hat on, right? It was a cold day. But this is the city that was really built on a hill, and I think it was 1837. The big earthquake, everything fell in. And here's the whole group. This is, you don't recognize certainly, this is Bruce, our tour guide, and this is near Mount Hermon. And then here we start to get into the city of Jerusalem. Anyone who was not on the trip want to take a guess what this is? What was it? It's the toilets. That's right. Can you imagine? Here are your public toilets, right? You sit in between these and do your business. And what? Yeah, this is a giant room. I think it was in, I'm trying to remember what city this was in now. Was this in Beit Shean? Which was probably, for me, one of the most spectacular archaeological sites. Because it wasn't just like, oh, look at this little thing that we discovered under the ground. It was, look at this giant city as far as the eye can see that we have uncovered. with pillars. Like you could walk. We were probably there 2 hours, and we could have spent the entire day just walking around this site, right?
Yes.
Just superb. And then here's another one of those theaters. And if we had planned it better, I'm looking at Jenny because she was up here taking pictures, and she said, "Michael, sing us something." So I couldn't find it, but the video is here, and they still have performances here at this in this theater. It was engineered for no echo. I didn't remember that one, Ed. Good. I'm impressed with that. Good. And then here is what sometimes has been called the Wailing Wall, also the Western Wall. And here's some beautiful moments of prayer. And I want to explain kind of what's going on here. First of all, there is a men's section and there's a women's section. Neither the twain shall meet at the Western Wall. But something I never knew, again, been in church most of my life, I've read these stories a lot, something I never really understood, these are not pictures I took, by the way, was that there is a Western Wall, and there is a Northern Wall, and there is an Eastern Wall along what was the old courtyard that enclosed the temple. But nobody cares, and it's not a holy site. The North Wall, am I saying the right directions? North, East? No. South and East Wall, those are not significant for prayer, right? You don't see people at the wall praying. And the reason is because the temple, this is the entrance for what would have been the old temple. And as you go through the first section, third section, this is the Holy of Holies, where God's Spirit was said to dwell on earth, right? This is his footstool. And the Western Wall, right here, is as close as we can get today to what would have been the Holy of Holies. Because here, after the temple, first and second temple were destroyed, nothing was there for a long time, and then the Muslims came in and built the Dome of the Rock, which is to commemorate and honor important historical religious events in their own history. If you see this, you flip to the other side, there's also an interesting timeline. I wish I had this before we went. I thought this was really helpful. But after the destruction of the temple and the Byzantine era, the Arab Caliphate came in and created the Dome of the Rock, which is the biggest place of contention because Jews still want to build another temple. If this were not here, they probably would, but they can't. And of course, the Muslims are never going to say, "Oh yeah, let's tear down that really important mosque so you can build what you want." So over here, this is, if you see right here, this area is, right here. So this is a picture I took. And I'll never forget the most beautiful moment when there was one gentleman here in this space with one of these big black hats, right? Which means that he's very orthodox, very conservative. And he actually is standing in this corner right here, as close as you can possibly get to the Holy of Holies. And he is fervently deep in prayer. And it was the most beautiful image to behold there. Jenny, did you want to share your story? Okay, thanks.
So when we entered into Jerusalem, we just come in, and so we go to the Western Wall, and everybody, they're like, make sure you have your little papers if you want to put them in. And it was, for me, I wasn't anticipating it being something particularly, moving. I was like, oh, cool, we're gonna go see the Western Wall. Like, doesn't that sound exciting? So we get up there, and you kind of have to wait as people are going up to the wall. And so I go up and I put my little I stuff my little paper with my prayer on it in there. And I'm standing there with my hand and like just thinking, like, I told myself, okay, Jenny, make the moment count. So I go and I'm praying for my family, and I pray for, I have all these different prayers that I go through. And it really kind of hit me like, oh, wow, like this really is a moment. But then I was just about finished, And there was a woman, a couple of people down from me, who let out like this kind of like racking sob, and it just like all of a sudden it just hit me. How many women have stood here over all of these years who have stood there? The tears that this wall has absorbed, that the ground that I stand on, the tears that have fallen, women praying for their children, their family, maybe praying for safety, praying out of fear, praying out of joy, that I was standing where these, where just millions of women had stood over the millennia, praying to God. And that was, I just stood there and couldn't help but just cry. It was so moving to me, thinking that, I'm connected, my faith is connected back for thousands of years, that those who have come before me have prayed here, and how profound that moment was. And to me, that's when it went from being this, like sticking the note in the wall, and isn't that, it was just so moving, and I could hardly contain myself. It took several more moments for me to get myself back together before being able to step away.
I would add, so Jerusalem remains highly patriarchal, and Orthodox Judaism in particular. And so the one thing you'll notice when you're at the wall, fathers and sons. So there is a strong tradition of pilgrimage for fathers to take their sons to Jerusalem once a year, whenever they can, but once a year, and introduce their sons to their history, their tradition, and the prayer life that is endemic to Jerusalem. I'm sure there were also women with daughters, mothers with daughters, but when you're over in the men's section, it's just amazing how many fathers and sons you see. Just overwhelming.
And if you are a person of means, to come to the wall for your bar mitzvah or your bat mitzvah is not unheard of. Certainly a special place. And as a Christian, of course, who has studied a lot about Judaism in the last several years, I'll be honest, this was the most profound, but also one of the most challenging moments and complex, because we as Christians believe that Jesus is the embodiment of the temple, right? We know with John's help, we know the story is heading to a new Jerusalem, a city where there is no temple. And yet, just as Jenny is pointing out, there is this history here. This is where God chose to reveal God's self and reside in this place. This is where we know so many stories from the Bible. And so it's hard to hold on to both of those things. I don't think you should hold on to one or the other. You should hold on to the tension of both, because it is, even though there is no temple any longer, it is still a sacred site with lots of important history. So, and for those who were came to listen about my thesis a few weeks ago, I'll share, I had a different moment on the other side of the wall, Jenny, is that I got done praying and it was very meaningful, and I stepped back and I realized that as my thesis was saying that Moses returned to the Garden of Eden, right? And all my reading said from Eden to Sinai, through the wilderness to the promised land, to the temple. And it clicked for me in a way I don't know it could have ever clicked otherwise. And I felt more alive than I knew I could, right? There was this sense of everything makes sense here. So, continuing around Jerusalem, we're going to zoom through some things. We have Nancy with her sister and her stepdaughters here. This is in Masada, right? Which is Herod's fortress, palace, fortress. We had to take what is this called? A tram. I can only think of the Spanish word for it. Up a hill to get to it. Very isolated. And from it, you can see the Dead Sea, just spectacular vistas all around. It was fascinating. On the one corner, it was as windy as I've ever experienced wind, right? And the tour guide said, this is where Herod would come on a hot day because this was the natural AC. You have wind going everywhere, and of course, you're going to be cooled down. And then here, if you were in the class in January on the Hebrew, I talked about this because this is the cave 4 of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is where the Qumran community likely deposited the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are so important for biblical studies. So that picture I took. I wish I could have actually gone down and gotten in, but maybe another time. We also, this is the same day. Yeah, you see the Dead Sea here, and we got in the Dead Sea. And then at the end of this, was this Shabbat? Or no, it was the next day was Shabbat. I know, Rabbi was doing a Havdalah, ending the Sabbath celebration that day. We had a special ceremony there in the hotel for that. Continuing into the heart of Jerusalem, again, feel free to shout and tell any stories here. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus would have been the traditional site where Jesus was buried. And it's beautiful, ornate, and ornate as you could imagine, and then some. And I mean, this is the ceiling, right? You have to like really crane your neck to get up here and to see this. Candles and just spectacular stuff all over the place. The one thing I walked away from this site, being a Protestant, I walked away from this grieved, because not that it's ornate, it's beautiful, but because there are 3 different branches of Christianity here represented that have been in conflict over this site and over control of the site for centuries, right? You would think that at the place where Christ died and came back, was resurrected by the power of the Spirit, that this would be a place of peace, but it's been a place of conflict. And so I believe it's the Catholics, the Greek Orthodox, and the Armenians are in constant kind of negotiations. That's the good word for it.
The demarcations,
the procession.
who owns what?
In the, it'll come to you in like 2 minutes. Try not to think about it, and it'll come to you, right? But there are certain hours of the day where the Armenians can have a procession, right? This is the holiest of sight. It's not just open on Sundays, it's open every day. And so there are processions at various hours, and the Armenians have these times, and the Catholics have these, and the Greek Orthodox, and they all have different times. Oh, I don't remember that story. Okay.
You want to repeat that? Because
This is where oil was anointed for the
King.
coronation of King who? Oh, King Charles. Well, that I didn't know. Oh, look at that. Okay, cool. This is another nerd moment, but this is the Aleppo Codex. We were in the Shrine of the Book. We were in the museum, and they said no photography, and I said, okay, great. I know I shouldn't have done it. There was no flash. There was no, what was that? They're not going to hear it. Come on. If they do, I'll be excited. Wouldn't it be great? If they're listening in, but they're not. So I did not point out the edicule. Go for it. This? Yeah. The edicule is where Christ was traditionally entombed. We're going to have to zoom through a few things, but this is, I didn't take any pictures in here, and neither did people share them. But these are just a few shots, mostly on the outside of Yad Vashem, which is an incredible museum and commemoration for the Holocaust. And the name of it comes from Isaiah 56. And it says, I will give them a monument and a name, Yad Vashem. And it was very difficult to go through this museum, this Yad Vashem. I learned a lot. I thought I knew a good amount about World War II history and about the Holocaust. I learned more than I knew was possible, and it was terrifying to learn what people are capable of, what we can do to each other. And that evening, I remember one of our Jewish brothers and sisters said, you all as Christians went there to learn history, but he went there to find family. And that struck a chord. And for me, as I went through this, I kept seeing my children again and again. I literally saw Theophile on the wall. I saw a young girl writing to her mother. And then I saw a child's face that looked very much like Nathaniel's. So everywhere I went, I was faced with my children. And it was profound and grief. We are cruel. I will share the one lovely thing that the architect did. You can't walk through this museum quickly. It's like a maze. It kind of goes back and forth. And the whole time you're ascending. And the last thing you see as you exit, you're outside, and then you see Jerusalem. It's this beautiful statement through architecture of no matter what people have done, come through, we are ascending, we will overcome. And look, we did overcome. You see Jerusalem in the distance, and it's almost as though Jerusalem is part of the museum at that time, right? This is where it has ended. We continued around Jerusalem. This is my Facebook profile picture, if you're wondering, what is that? That is the another site of the empty tomb. Whether this was Jesus's or not, we don't know. As the tour guide that day said, the geography doesn't matter, but the story does. And we believe Christ is risen. Now here is one empty tomb. This is what it looks like inside. And just near it, this is the traditional site of Golgotha, the hill, hill of the skull. Those are locked. But this is, we read the story so often and we think that the crucifixion happened on top of the hill. Why? That's traditional. We don't actually know. It's much more likely, as our tour guide said, that it was down here where people would be walking so that they could see up close and personal what happens if you mess around with Rome. And I thought it was fascinating. I'm standing in this museum, the Garden Tomb area complex, and just on the other side of the wall is a totally other place, and this is a bus depot. And I think that there's something beautiful, weird, and fascinating about potentially one of the holiest sites in Christianity where Jesus died is a bus depot. Isn't it a funny little thing? Here is one picture. We didn't get too long here in the Garden of Gethsemane, but here is one of those beautiful trees there. And then on the way, we walked for, 4 years. How long did we walk down that big hill?
4 years.
It was rough. It was rough. But along here, you see one of the biggest cemeteries in Jerusalem, and I think in Jewish cemeteries in the world. What was that? And it's the oldest. And the reason is because it is right by the Eastern Gate, which is traditional. The traditional understanding is that the East Gate, which has now been closed up, you can't actually walk through it anymore. But this understanding is that one day the Messiah, when the Messiah comes, he will walk through this gate. And it is this hill goes straight down, and on the other side is that eastern gate. So when Messiah comes back, we want to be there. I think that's pretty cool. Here are some stories. We actually went into Palestine. We saw, this is the church of the, oh my goodness, the words. Nativity. Thank you, Nativity. All these fancy words, and you're back to Greek and Hebrew and Latin, and I swear it's hard to hold on to them all. Church of the Nativity. Unfortunately, we didn't all get to go down and see. This is, our tour guide said, that's a 2-hour line. We have 2 hours total, so we can't go see that. But I'll send you some pictures. So he airdropped us some pictures, and this was the traditional site where Jesus may have been born. But for me, it was much more interesting, and this holy moment I had in the basement, where I was talking to the tour guide. We were kind of waiting for people to come and go, and I was talking about, isn't this where Jerome, the church father Jerome, was? And didn't he have his study here? Was he buried here? And he said, you know Jerome? Come with me. Just me. And he takes me down these stairs, and there are these several little rooms. They're all connected. And this is an altar in one of them. I think this is Jerome. And this is where Jerome lived for 30 years of his life, where he translated the Bible into Latin, and where he had some help, and where he was eventually buried. Now his bones were moved, but it was holy for me, even though it wasn't a Christian, like it's not a site where Jesus was. It was a holy moment for me because I was the only one there for 5 minutes, and then people came. But we're gonna zoom through. This is the roots. We had some conversations between Jewish and Muslim folks there in Palestine. You can see I'm all bundled up. There was no heat in this room whatsoever, and they said it'll warm up. It didn't warm up. The following day, many of us continued on to Jordan, and some went back to the States. But before we did, some CPC folks went to a Presbyterian church. This is St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church, and I love it. This is a Pentecost, I think it was a burning bush banner that they had there in the chancel. So some folks went home, some folks continued on to Jordan. I'm going to zoom because we don't have time. This you saw on the cover of a bulletin a few weeks ago. This is looking out from Mount Nebo. In Jordan, we went down to Petra, and then some people said, I like to be in a car for a long time, and so they went down here to Wadi Rum. I did not. And somebody went back to the hotel and had a cup of coffee and took a nap. It was great. And then came back to Petra, and then it was a long time on the road. It's funny, in Jordan, about every half mile there's a speed bump because they think we don't want people to speed. What was it? It felt like every 100 feet. I was being generous. Here we are around Jordan. Some beautiful views. Here's the group. I think there were about 20 of us that stayed. This is at the Treasury. If you've seen Indiana Jones, you recognize that site. Oh, here are some funny moments. This is where we're going to end. Some funny moments. I don't know why, but everyone is still amazed that I can sleep on the floor of an airport. I don't get it. But I took a nice little nap. Everyone else was tired, and I was wide awake. So afterwards, so it was great. This is me getting ready for doing the baptisms, which is hilarious. And also, this is me at the getting mud all over myself at the Dead Sea. There are lots of other funny moments too. This is my favorite thing ever. I didn't know this existed, but I want one. This is a vending machine for books. I didn't even know such a thing existed. This is like right by the Western Wall. You can go and like buy a prayer book at a vending machine, which is all sorts of fun. And then Courtney said, how about we ride a camel? So if we had 20 more minutes, we would talk much more about the trip and the interfaith elements of it all. And I'll end with this. Oh, no, I will say, does anyone have any closing comments? Nothing? Jenny, you got nothing?
Well, sure, I could talk all night. You know me. I will say, I think for all of us on the trip, and something that hit me, especially when we got to Galilee, and standing in these places, and I thought to myself, I will never read the Bible the same way again. Because now, when I read those stories, I can picture those places. And that was really an incredible opportunity that I don't think I had really like reconciled it in my head going like, oh, that's going to hit me in that way. So that was really something. And, you hear about all these cities and towns in the Bible. So you have this kind of really historical thought, like almost as though Israel itself should be a museum, or Jerusalem itself should be, the whole of it should be a museum. But it is a living, thriving, breathing place that you're you're looking at these holy sites, and there are people bustling around, children crying and laughing, and people arguing and shopping and going. And it's just that here we are standing in these sacred, like what you think of you read the Bible and you think of it as this very moment in time, a very still point, but it's not. Life surrounds it. It is, every space was full of life and energy, and that really hit home for me.
And for me, I had one moment several moments like that, but the one that sticks out is on our last night after Jordan, we were back in Jerusalem. It was Shabbat again. And there were hordes of people going to synagogue. And as they passed us, they all said, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. It was at least 3 dozen times I've heard Shabbat Shalom. And it was this sense of, this is where worlds collide. And this is a holy place where life is still going on. I know we've got to get to worship or brunch if you already were in worship. But before we depart, I will say just 2 more things. One, here's a beautiful quote I love from T.S. Eliot about travel. We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of our exploring, will to be arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. For me, I feel like I know Scripture for the first time after having visited Israel. And I hope that if you haven't been, that you will try to get there. There's already discussions. Rabbi is already talking about going again in another 3 or 4 years. So if you haven't gone, I encourage you to go. And thank you for your time. And that's where you had to get it in right before the end. You had to get it in. I love it. The status quo was the word that phrase Jenny couldn't remember. Bingo. The Lord be with you. Have a good rest of your day.